Hey, what's up, comrades? We got volume 2 of what the hell is this thing called? It is called Min-Maxing my TRPG build in Another World, volume 2. Very good. So go ahead and like, share, subscribe, and comment on this, and we'll go ahead and get started. So we pick up directly when the last book ends, but not really, because if you remember from the first volume, from my other video, or if you read the comic or whatever, we get an epilogue that takes place like 8 years later, where he's married Margette, and they have a kid, and they're living in the canton, and things are going great. This picks up from before the epilogue, so right when the Magi lady says, "Oh, a changeling, how interesting." We pick up like right there. And so we learn more about this Magi. So she's a Methuselah race, which is like an elf. And then she's a Magi, which is like her class, which is like a super, it's not like the Magus from Pathfinder. It's more just kind of like a super magic user and stuff. So she's starting to say all these things about Alyssa being a changeling and what this, and then Aerich gets super mad and he yells at her and tells her to go fuck herself, and then she does something to him that kind of like knocks him out. We then go to the village, and Lambert's talking about how he's like kind of partying, and then someone mentions kidnapping. Margaret's like not in this at all thus far. Mentions kidnapping, and then Alyssa and Erich's dad comes rolling in, and he grabs his sword. He's like, "We're going to go fuck these guys up. Let's go." And then all these villagers are like, "Yeah." And then they kind of go, and there's the Methuselah lady just standing there with Alyssa and Aerich. And she's like, "Oh, these belong to you?" And the dad's like, "Yes." And he's like, you're from some noble house. May I ask which one?" And she says whatever it is. And then everyone like bows down. And she's like, "Ooh." We then get to Aerich. And he is like awoken by this lady, and she's like summons like she's just like smoking a cigar, essentially, like not a cigar, like one of those long cigarettes or like a pipe or something, and she has like a snuff box, and she's just like starts chit-chatting with him about how he's wasted his like potential. And then he thinks about how he has invested experience points into mana or magic to make it good, but he assumed that was just like a protective factor, and that it was good for like humans who are not naturally magically inclined. But based on what she says, he realizes that it's good, period. So he has good stats in comparison to like people who actually do magic, like wizards and stuff. So he's like, "Oh, I see. I've completely not invested any time or energy into magic use, just mana capability." And so after she teases him about that, she starts talking about his sister, and they go back and forth a little bit, but essentially she reveals that she's a changeling, and that what changelings are is kind of what they are, and if you're familiar with like Irish mythology or Scottish, Celtic mythology pretty much, in that, but it's different. It's not like they steal the baby away. What happens is like a fairies push like some sort of like spirit into like the womb of like a woman, and they love blonde-haired, blue-eyed people because Aryan nation and such. And so, and then, you know, when life is created or whatever, they like take possession of that life, but then they're born and they're very like weak, and most of them don't make it very long. Like they die after a couple of years, or like the strain of like the human, like the mensch body and the changing spirit or something causes some sort of like weird problem. And the fact that Alyssa's like 7 years old and she has extraordinary like mana capabilities, it makes her very dangerous, and it's very concerning. And so Erich's trying to like come to terms with this, and the Methuselah lady is trying to like walk him into the idea that like, hey, the government's going to find out that this chick exists, and they're going to lose their shit, and they're going to like lock it down or destroy her or put her in like a research lab because she's lived so long with like all this power, and normally they don't live that long, and there's all this stuff going on and whatnot. And then Erich's like, "Oh damn, what are we going to do?" And then she's like, "You need to calm the fuck down." "I'm going to take care of it. Because, I don't know, I like you or something. Who knows?" The Magus lady and our hero, they chit-chat for a while. So her proposal is that the sister, the changeling, she's going to apprentice her. And because she's going to apprentice her, and she's from a noble house, and she's a Magus instead of just a mage, then the society, the empire or whatever, should leave her alone and just let her be apprenticed, because there's some sort of agreement, I guess, that although changelings are extremely dangerous, that if she can be apprenticed by this Magus and go through like the school and gain control of her powers, then she's going to be a loyal subject and an asset to the Empire instead of being like a danger. So the Erich's like, yes, that is a good idea. Let's do that. And she's like, all right, well, let me think. So an apprenticeship costs about 30 drachmae. I guess I could do it for 15. And he's like, holy shit. Like, our family makes like 5 drachmae a year. And that's not like profit. That's like how much, that's like minus, 5 minus all the expenditures and everything. And he's like, there's no way. And he's like, and then she's like, oh yeah. She's like, yeah, it's just 15 a year. And he's like, 15 a year? What the? So he's like losing his mind. And she's like, oh, money, whatever. And he's like, but it's impossible. There's nothing I can do. And she's like, well, the rules are the rules. I guess if you become my servant, you can pay off the debt and I'll just give you the money. And he's like, okay, let's do that. And and she's like, agreed. So they shake it out, and then they announce that he's going to go be her servant and that she's going to take the sister to be her apprentice to become a Magus. And everyone's going to win, except Margit, who obviously loses. Well, we take a little side venture and we learn about the history of this Magus. I think she like identifies herself with some crazy name. And he's like, oh, that sounds like a name I read in a history book about some evil wizard or something. Anyway, so her father, the Methuselah / elf, he was like a wanderer in a kingdom, and we just learned more about her family history, that he just kind of did whatever the fuck he want, and everyone's like really upset because they'd be like, we had a civil war, and he's like, I don't give a fuck. And that she did the wandering thing for a little bit, as her kind is prone to, but then she decided she just wanted to sit and read. So she went and she left the kingdom she was in and came to this empire and joined like the Mages Academy or whatever. And then she just read in a library for like 5 years or something, or 3 years, instead of doing anything else. And her magic capabilities are exceedingly high, so they kind of put up with it. But at some point they were like, you haven't done what you were supposed to be doing, which is like publishing research and stuff, like doing academic bullshit. And she's like, what are you going to do about it? And they're like, well, you have to go do something of note. You have to go do something to add to the academy, and you cannot return until then. But one of the things the dean did say before they kind of like banished her from the academy was like, you have to do something of note, or find like an apprentice if you can, and bring him back. But it's got to be somebody who's really good. And so she's like, fuck. So when she found this changeling, it's like she's doing them a favor, but in reality, she's like, yes, I can bring this changeling back as my apprentice, and then I can go back to just like reading my books and doing whatever the fuck I want. Because it was talking about she was doing all this random stuff. Like, instead of going to lectures like she's supposed to, she would just send like a familiar to like record it, or she would like look through a hole while she just like read on her own and all this stuff, and it was really like pissing everybody off. So this is going to work out big time for her. Going back to Aerich, him and Margit meet up, and she's really sad eponymous about him leaving. And she's like, how long do you think this is going to take? And he's like, 5 years. And she's like, really, just 5 years? Because it sounds like it's going to take a lot more. And he's, no, I promise. I promise you I'll be done in 5 years. And she's, in 5 years, I'll be 19. And she'll be like, oh, I've embarrassed myself. I'll be an old maid. Because apparently people get married between 17 and 18. Or 15? People get married like 15 to 17 and like 18. Good Lord Jesus Christ. You got married at 18? You're a piece of shit. That's what they make it sound like in this book. I was like, okay. I guess you're in a small farming community in the middle of nowhere. It's like you got to get married to get this done, get having kids. But yeah. So she's really distraught about being an old maid, and he's like, no, I'll make sure, and then it'll be good, and all this stuff. And she's like, you promise? And he's like, yeah, I promise. We'll go on an adventure, and we'll be together, and I love you, and all. He doesn't say I love you, but all this stuff. And she's like, okay. And then she bites his ear, and then puts an earring in it, and then she's like, all right, do me next. And he's like, the fuck? And so he pricks her ear and gives her the earring too, so they can match and never forget each other. Every now and then, the book gives us these little like information sheets about. And I mentioned this in the review of the first book, that talk about different role-playing game stuff. Like for here, it's like a supplement. What is a supplement? Supplement is something that adds rules. It also every now and then kind of gives this little blurb that's like, something happens and it seems very profound, but since we don't have any idea what's going on, and instead of breaking the story up and having the characters explain stuff to each other that they should already know, which is retarded, it just gives us like a footnote, which is interesting. Because it's like not good writing, but it's not bad writing either. Because like the writing is good because the characters act like characters who live in this world and know things. But there's to be good writing, this would come along naturally. We'd learn about things, but in this, it's more like a role playing game, or like it actually is like a TTRPG where it's like, oh, by the way, this was important because this is more significant than you think. Because it's like the fact that they both get like one earring in this set seems pretty significant, and then it's like footnote, and the footnote is traditionally in this world, if a man wears like an earring on the right ear, it means like masculinity, and then if a girl wears an earring on the left ear, it means like femininity or something. That's not exactly what it is, but it's like it's more specific than that. But that's generally what it's talking about. So if they split the earrings and one wears it if man wears it on the right and a girl wears the same pair on the left, it means they're like eternally bonded, right? It's like a marriage proposal to some extent, I would imagine, is what it was going for. So yay, they're gonna be together forever. Anyway, so Aerich heads back home and helps get Elisa, his sister, to sleep, and she's very upset because, like, you know, she's a changeling, she was kidnapped, now she's unkidnapped, now she's leaving, and she's gonna be a mage, and like all this crazy shit's happening, and she's 7 years old, right? Like, holy shit. And she's a little underdeveloped emotionally, so she's more like a 5-year-old, and as someone who has a 5-year-old, damn. Like, that would be rough. Like, she's got a lot of issues going on there. Anyway, so after everyone's down, Erich's like getting ready for bed, and his dad comes in. Him and his dad are just sitting there chilling, and his dad's like, I need a drink. So Aerich goes and gets like his special secret liquor, and then they start drinking together a little bit, and the dad's like, I wasn't the first son. And I don't know if I explain this too much, but in this world, this whole concept of like the first son is a super big deal because they're the ones who inherit, and then the first sons, they got to like get the fuck out and figure out what to do with their lives. So they either got to marry into a family where like the oldest daughter, or they don't have sons, so like they need a son. So you score the jackpot there, so that you can inherit the land and the farm and whatnot. Or you got to go be a mercenary or an adventurer or like a priest. It's that kind of like feudal society. So we find out that Erich's dad was not the first son, and that he was actually a mercenary for a while. And Erich's like, holy shit, like, I had no idea. But then what happened is that there was a plague, and it killed his older brother, who was the first son, and his dad was the second son. So then he had to come back. But then the parents were so distraught that then they died shortly thereafter. And he's got a bunch of other siblings, right? Because they live around. And he mentions like going to like festivals or parties or being involved in family events or weddings or whatever. And he had no one ever mentioned this ever. And he's like, yeah. And so I had this dream, and I did all this stuff. And then I had to come back. So I feel bad because I feel like we're doing that to you by making you take care of your sister. And then Aerich assures him, like, no, I love my sister and I want to take care of her. This is what I want to do. And I'm happy. And his dad's like, hey, that makes me feel good. And then they like kind of hug it out. They don't literally hug it out, but then they both head off to bed. We get some perspective from Elisa, the sister, at this point. She's very upset. She just talks about she's crying and crying for days, and she doesn't want to go, and she doesn't understand. And she's just not having a good time, but she's going, and that's how it's going to be. So we switch back over to Aerich, and they're riding in the carriage of the Magus, and she has created like a penthouse suite of a carriage. So it has something to do with like space magic or gravitational pull, something. So essentially, it looks like a carriage, but then you get inside, and it's got like a bedroom and a bathroom, and it's got like carpeted floors and like a sitting area. It's like, and then the Magus is like, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to be in this thing for a few months, and it's so cramped. And then Aerich looks around and he's like, the fuck, this is bigger than like this is bigger than like my house. Like, goddamn. So that's fun. And then we get some conversation with him and the Magus about just like what's going on, about being at the capital. And he just kind of recalls that like the capital, so there's like 3 main noble houses that kind of like exist within this kingdom, and that they all want a very small capital because they don't want like to create like a Washington DC situation essentially. And so they keep the power in their own houses and their own territories, but then they all kind of come together for this kingdom, right? And so there's like a small town where like the capital is with like the king, and like I think they have a king. And kind of all the nobles have like emissaries there, and then there's like a small community to like prop up the magic academy and this. We also learned that the author spent some time discussing how there's like mages and magus and sorcerers, but magus are the only like legally recognized magic users, but that everybody just kind of like looks away from the other unsanctioned magic users because it'd be too much trouble to try to do anything about it. And so instead of like trying to lock down on everything and fight other random magic users and whatnot, they just kind of like, as long as they're not doing anything to it. It's kind of like drinking. It's kind of like smoking pot in a lot of places. I feel like it's like, hey man, you grow what you want and you smoke what you want. As long as you don't get caught, like no one's gonna give a fuck, right? And if you're like selling on the side, like unless you do something really crazy, it's kind of people kind of just like, it is what it is. That's not wholly true because in America people get real uptight about all that shit because they're fucking insane, and this whole drug war is retarded. But that's a whole other side story. Anyway, at this point, the Magus looks at him kind of funny. It's like, come here. You're not very helpful as a servant the way you are. And he's like, ruh-roh, is she gonna like back down on the deal or do something crazy? And she chooses option number 2. So she grabs him, or she does something to him. Oh, that's right. She blows into her hand and like puffs at him. And we learn at this point that humans have to have some sort of device as a conduit for magic, while Methuselah and some other races can just naturally be a conduit among themselves. So like the elves in this world are really like fucking OP. According to how they're being described and all this stuff. So good for them, I guess. Anyway, so then he has like the worst pain. He describes it as hell. It's like the worst thing he's ever felt in his entire life. He's never felt anything so terrible and awful, and he feels like his veins are popping out of his head, his nerves are exploding and whatnot. And that's because, dun-dun-dun, she gave him some mana to unlock his natural magic affinity. So I didn't talk about this before, but there's like a whole thing where he's trying to unlock magic. He wants to use magic because, of course, he's in a fantasy world of magic. Why not? But he can't. It's like locked. But he has a high proficiency, like a natural proficiency for like mana and stuff that like just exists, that he's just kind of like held on to. And so thinking about it, when she's looking at him and trying to consider like his ability to be a mage, he has exceedingly high potential, but it's like not, it normally would naturally occur, but it has like not occurred. And she mentions that like looking at you is like looking at an adult crawling around on the ground. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense, because he has complete control over like his stat growth. So if he does something a lot, it doesn't mean anything. He just gets experience, and then he can use that to put experience into something else, right? So it's very odd if you're like a natural person in this world and kind of just like looking on, especially if you have a predilection to be able to sense magical energy and powers from people. Okay. So now he has unlocked his magical capabilities, and then she pulls a book out of the ether, hands it to him, and the book is like Good Housekeeping 101 for mages. And he's like, wah, wah, wah. So Erich's looking through this book that he's got, and it's got a lot of fun spells in it. Mostly it's, chores, doing chores and stuff. He then gets a lecture from Agrippina. As you know, he was trying to like figure out some stuff from like the mage hand essentially and whatnot. And she gives him like a nice little, what do you call it? Like a lesson on how magic works. And it's kind of like Mage the Ascension logic, where like the world has like a structure, and what magic users do is they use the mana that everyone has inside them to kind of like how does she compare it? She says something about like you have like a cloth, but we have like needles and thread, and so we can sew like other things into the fabric of reality. But there's no like paradox like there is in Mage the Ascension. It could be exactly the same system. It's just everyone expects magic to be real, so no one's like really shocked, so it doesn't affect paradox in this universe. So it's that kind of magic. It's the bending logic and such, and having an effect on fate and whatnot. So he decides his new build is that he's gonna learn a bunch of like little magics, like little buffer and debuffer magics and little things, so that he can use them as like, he refers to it as how does he refer to it? So there's actions, and then the actions in like a Pathfinder Dungeons & Dragons style game, there's like regular actions, and then there's they don't call them free actions, but there's essentially actions that don't cost actions, and then there's like reactions. And so the free actions are stuff like drink a magic potion to heal, or like say something while you're fighting, stuff like that, where it just doesn't take anything. So all the spells he's using are like, he's trying to master, are these spells that he can use, so he can attack still as an action, and then he has like these other free actions, which is not how Pathfinder 2nd edition works, by the way, which is, I kind of like that system a little bit better. Anyway, so he does that for a little bit, and then he's outside practicing this maneuver, and then he's attacked by what he thinks is mercenaries, these 6 like goblin and like an ogre or orc or something, and he defeats them all. And then Agrippina rolls up, and she's like, "The fuck you doing?" And Agrippina again is the Magus. So she's like, "What the fuck you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, they attacked me, so I defeated them." And she's like, "That's actually pretty impressive." And then she like cracks him open and is like, look at this delicious crystals I got in there. Those are worth a lot. They're worth, if you sold all these, it'd be like, it would cost me like 50 silver to buy all these things, or whatever, 5 silver, I don't know, like half a gold piece essentially. And he's like, wow, that's a lot. And she's like, yeah, but unfortunately that's what the store's selling it. So if you sell it, you're gonna get like 1/10 of that. So you're gonna get like like 50 copper or like a silver. And he's like, oh, that's far less worth it, or like 5 silver or something. And she's like, and she goes off about it. It's like, so what happens with demon folk, which are like, because, he had friends who were like goblins and other such creatures, and that ogre lady was super nice. But if they get too much mana, then they can't like release it. Then they become like, they go crazy. They become like feral. And so, then you have to hunt them down because they have all this ichor. But when the ichor mixes with like something in their system, it creates these like mana batteries. And so they're pretty nice to have because they can like recharge your mana, or like they're good conduits or some bullshit or whatever. Anyway, so she's like, I'll tell you what, I'll buy all these for like 2.5 or like 25 silver, because that's it's still cheap for me, but then you get some more money. And he's like, high five, economics is awesome. Which, go read Spice and Wolf. It is awesome. It's so good. Let me think. We get a lot more of like the sister pouting and stuff and being sad, but then when they get to like some place, and then Aerich is like out doing something. He's like eating at the stables, and this like fairy lady who they call an Alf, not elf, like Alf, the guy who eats cats, the Muppet. If you don't know, look it up, ALF. I don't think that's how they spell it. It's the audiobook, so I don't really know. So she is like, he sees like the secret moon, which going all the way back to like the first book is reference that he can't see the secret moon, and that's what the wizard's like, maybe you don't have potential to be a mage. But now he can't see the secret moon, and he's like staring at it, and then the Alf fairy lady is like, yo, what up? You should come with me. And she's so beautiful, and he's into like the lolicon because of Margit or whatever it is. And so he's like, maybe. And then Agrippina shows up, and she's like, the fuck you do? And she like scatters the Alf off, and then she's like, hey, bitch, stop being an asshole. Like, don't just follow things. And so she's like, hey, I got an idea. So the sister, Elisa, she's been very pouty, and so Agrippina's like, hey, so your brother almost got kidnapped by a fairy. And Alyssa is like, oh no. And then Agrippina's like, you can do something about it, because if you remember, she's a changeling, and changelings are technically, they're just like fairies who went and like possess like human bodies or some bullshit. And so they're like a little different, but they're like trapped in there, but they have like elf powers, goddamn, I'm just gonna call them fairy powers. And and so she gets Elisa to like be on board with like learning magic and stuff so she can protect her brother, which Elisa's like very big fan of the idea. Going back to Aerich, he has a conversation with Agrippina, and she's like, hey, there's like an old mansion over here that's overrun with these like demon creatures. So if you go clear that out, that'll make you some more money. That'll be great. And then you can like, practice your skills and whatnot. So he heads over that way, and the fairy lady shows up again, and she's like, hey, sorry about before. And he's like, the fuck you want? And she's like, I need your help rescuing my sisters. If you can come help me, I will give you a blessing. And I promise not to try to kidnap you. And he's like, all right, that sounds good. So he has a whole conversation in his head, and this is where we learn about like, hey, there's goblin folk and ogres that are good, and then some that are possessed, and so they're bad, and it's all because of fucking RPG mechanics. So he's in there, and he kills a bunch, and he finds this extra fairy who's like the sister. And so the first elf, I can't remember her name, she's like a fairy of the moon or the fairy of night, and this new one's the fairy of the wind. And so they're so excited. And we also learned previously, I don't know if I mentioned this, that fairies love blonde hair and blue eyes, because fuck it, why not? Those racist Aryan bastards. What a bunch of fucking Nazis these fairies are. Am I right? So little Hitlers. Okay. And so they both give him a blessing. The blessing, he has like a bunch of options for blessing, but essentially they just give the blessing that they can be summoned to help, and that she can help with like hiding him or giving him like night vision or whatever. And then the wind fairy can help by like finding things, because she can sense breaths or some bullshit like that. And they both give him like a smoochy smooch, and he's he's like all flustered about that because he's like 15, I guess, which makes him an adult. I don't know, he might still be 14. And then the wind fairy was about to give him like this dagger, and he's like, let me see that dagger. And it like ignores armor, and he's like, holy shit. And she's like, yeah, whatever, I want to kiss you instead. So she tosses it, but he's able to go find it again. So he's like, sweet, now I got a sweet ass new fucking magic dagger. This is fucking OP as shit. I feel great. And so he tracks down, kills the rest of them, and finally gets to the main chamber where the ogre lady is, who's, it's not the ogre lady from before, it's like a corrupted ogre. And he fights, and the battle's very tough because of his like magic armor ignoring dagger. He's able to defeat her, but he's all tuckered out afterwards. And like, wow, you look real tuckered out. And he's like, all right, time to go home. And then fairy number 1 is like, hold up, you didn't realize I said sisters, not sister. So there's one more to go find. And so if you remember the sad story about the lady who was a changeling and the father tried to turn her back into a human, even though that's not how changelings fucking work, asshole. And that, you know, he went crazy doing all this stuff. Well, she's still trapped here. And that's some bullshit. So they go track her down and they find this like corpse looking thing that is kind of still alive, but it's under like a curse. And they're like, I don't know what's going to happen. It's been like hundreds of years or something since this all went down. So this could be really bad or whatever. And so finally Erich's like, all right, I'm going to do it. So he releases the curse and then she kind of wakes up and she looks crazy. And then she's like screams or like does some weird motion. And then she zoop disappears. And they're like, fuck, what do we do now? And Aerich does the only reasonable thing anyone would do, and that's summon someone who knows a lot more about this shit than he does. So Agrippina shows up to kind of help them murder mystery, figure this shit out. As Agrippina, the Magus, is wandering around looking at all the stuff in this place, she's spent a lot of time talking and thinking about Erich's luck. Ever since she got involved with this guy, she's like, he has been kind of nothing but trouble. Not trouble per se, but just kind of like, he's got changeling this, Alf that, magic secret powers, like running into bandits, finding other secret bandits. Like, the fuck is going on with this dude? After she wanders around and checks everything out, she kind of wraps that up, and we jump to the Frost Elf, who's the girl, who's the changeling, whose father locked her up, right? The one that that Aerich should have probably just killed, but that he was trying to rescue because he's such a good guy, and being a good guy had him do the wrong thing, clearly. So she's just up in the air, sitting around thinking about her dad, thinking about her life, what she needs to do with herself, kind of all that weird bullshit. When all of a sudden she notices Aerich. And so she moves towards him to like have like, because she views Aerich as like her dad because he's like a guy who's blonde, right? Because Alf's the changelings, they really like blonde hair and blue eyes. So because of that, and because she's like lucid, like not lucid with like thought and everything, she's getting closer. We then switch to Erich's point of view, and Aerich is like, all right, I have one chance to do this. I'm going to make up for the terrible thing I did. I should have just killed her and released her from her pain. So now I got to do it because she's like going crazy and bad stuff's going to happen. Things don't go quite as he expects. He takes his like new magic dagger that he got from the fairies, the one that cuts through armor, and he goes slice right into her neck, but he doesn't decapitate her completely. And she doesn't die because guess what? She's already dead. So this like frost reverent elf like creature starts to get like really pissed off that her dad did this thing to her, and then realizes that's not her dad, and she starts to lose it. So she creates this like crazy storm and knocks Aerich back. After getting knocked back, he's like, oh shit, I gotta go. And he pushes forward to finish to kill her, so to end her pain and misery and all that stuff. And he's super, we get a lot of perspective from him about how upset he is, how he needs to be stop being so soft-hearted, and how like the elves are like, hey, it's okay, you didn't do the right thing, but we're still here for you, like the night one and the wind one. At this point, hold on, let me check my notes. Sorry, I read this a couple days ago. Okay, so at this point, Agrippina shows up, and she's about to blast the shit out of this fairy and end it, and Erich's like, no, this is my problem, I gotta take care of it. And Agrippina's like, all right, well, I respect that, so I'm gonna guard the carriage. And they're like, yeah, as long as Elisa stays asleep in there, we should all be fine, right? No. Well, right, but Elisa at this point, she comes stumbling out because she woke up and Erich's not sleeping with her, and she's got like a Oni-chan complex, and so she rolls out and she's like, what's going on? And then the fairy sees like her pop out and is like, the fuck's this? And then she sees, oh no, this is where the frost elf is like, that he's not my dad, because she sees Elisa run out and give Aerich a hug, and Erich's like, oh my gosh, you gotta get out of here, something, and she like increases the storm and it's about to like do a lot of damage, and then his friend elves come along and like they're like, he's like, hey, take Alyssa and protect and watch over her, I gotta go. And so he kind of runs up and uses all his powers, and he summoned, he has like the ogre blade and shield that he got from the ogre he killed previously, the demon ogre. He lifts them up with like his mage hand that he's like given a lot of like extra powers to in magic. And so he uses those to kind of push himself through, and he finally gets up to the elf, and then he stabs her real good so that she's officially dead. And then she starts to like fade from existence and die. She apologizes for thinking that he was her dad, and then he kind of she fades away, and then Erich's like really sad and he's crying, and everyone like the elves are giving him like a hug in the back and all this stuff, and it's a very sad scene, and that's the end of the book, except for the epilogue, and the epilogue is like, what the fuck? So it's just really odd, and it's odd the way it's written, at least in how it's translated. There might be some like stuff I'm missing based on how it's translated, but it just starts off and we're like in the past, I want to say, and this girl, like Alyssa, when she's like a little girl, is out in the woods and she's lost, and then this golden-haired wolf who's like an elf shows up to like rescue her, and then the wolf brings her back, and after returning, she goes to talk to like her grandmother, and the grandmother's like, oh, that's something. That's the he helps lost travelers and children return home, and that's so we're so blessed, and we gotta like be so thankful that he's doing these kind things. And then we get a perspective from the wolf, and he tells us that he used to be a mensch, which is like the humans in this world, but then he transformed, and that he doesn't really remember his mensch form anymore, but that there's like some weird connection to that, and that he likes going out and helping people, and that his companions, which one of them is Ursula, like the night fairy elf lady, is always like, you gotta chill out and just party with us and have a good time, and he's like, yeah, I don't know about that, I'm gonna go help more people. And at this point he finds like he's traveling, or he feels the summons because there's this like isekai guy who's lost in the woods, so they team up, and then like then we switch to like there's this warrior killing these bandits, and she's known as Alyssa the Magus, the Elf Slayer or something like that, and she's just beating the shit out of and it's like Alyssa the future. It's like literally Alyssa, the little girl from Erich's little sister. Now this is like in the future where she's like a warrior, and she's got this magic blade that is like the elf killer, so she kills like elves and bandits, and she's like bloodthirsty, but it's only for people who do bad things to like children or to like people or whatever. And this is like one chapter. Like this is not like I'm not summing this up. It's just like it hits it, moves to the next thing, hits it, moves to the next thing. So we're like from the perspective of the bandits, and then we go from there, and they're freaking out, and then we go to the perspective of like the isekai guy, and he's holding onto the wolf, and he tells the story about how him and the wolf they've been partners for like years, and they've gone on all these adventures, but now they're being chased by this crazy warrior lady, and the lady's like cutting through trees, and like her and the wolf are like fighting it out and battling to the death, and then at some point the wolf is like in his escape, as he's escaping, he leaps over this gorge, and the isekai warrior like falls off down the gorge. Then the isekai warrior, or the isekai guy, he like wakes up on the side of a river, and there's the warrior lady that's been chasing him, and she's just chilling, and she's like, hi, I'm Alyssa, and let me tell you a story. Or he's like, why are you chasing that wolf? And she's like, let me tell you a story. And so we find out that that's Alyssa, and then the wolf is Aerich. And at some point he got tricked or something by the elves and transformed into an elf, like shed his like mensch body, and that she's trying to get her brother back. And who knows when this happened, or any it's like there's no context for any of this. It's kind of like the scene in the previous book where it's like you get to the epilogue, and the epilogue is like years later, and Erich's like married to Margit, and they have a kid, and that actually took place in the beginning of the manga, which I don't know about the light novel that this is actually all rooted in. I'm assuming the light novel came first, so then the manga put it at the beginning for some reason. I don't know. Anyway, it's so much confusing shit, y'all. It's just so much. All right. So are there like multiple futures that could possibly be, or like what is this? That's kind of my assumption. Or maybe this is like it's anime, so it's like this has happened multiple times, or there's multiple realities. Or these are all like hypothetical, or maybe he's looking through like a crystal ball at all the things that could have happened. Like he could have stayed in the village and just married Margit and had a kid, or maybe he hung out with the elves too long. It's one of those things where it's like I'm not exactly sure. I almost feel like if he had chosen a different path, or something else had happened in the TTRPG game that he's like playing or existing in, these are like the endings we would have gotten. So the epilogues are like maybe endings, because they're not copacetic. Like the whole thing where he becomes like an elf and then his sister is a warrior and fights does not match with him marrying Margit and having a kid. So it's like maybe if he just continued along this path and not like I don't know, his sister had never been kidnapped. Like, this is the path he would have had. I don't know if it's ever going to explain. I know that at the end of this book, it says there's a third audiobook ready to go, so I guess I got to track that down because it wasn't in like the big batch of audiobooks. So I might try to look that up before I move on to the next book series that I'm going to listen to. We'll see if I can find it. Anyway, the way it really ends there with the epilogue is that after Alyssa tells this story, they like go to sleep, and then the isekai guy gets woken up by Aerich the wolf, who's like, come on, we got to go. And he's like, what happened? It's like, oh, I had some of my elf fairies like put you guys to sleep like very, 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 very slowly so that Alyssa would not realize it, and we're gonna flee again. And the man's like, well, you know, you used to be human. Why don't you just turn back to human? And then Aerich, like the wolf, like looks off in the distance, is like, I don't remember what that is or something. The end. So the book's good. I continue to enjoy listening to it, and that's, like I said, it's like if I can find this third audiobook, I'll do that instead of skipping to like the next series, which is what I was gonna do because I just don't have it. But I'll look it up. I'll use one of these. I'll get on my old pirate ship, sail around a little bit, see what I can discover. But it's recommended. This whole thing is like, it's interesting because it started off like as an isekai, and it quickly became just like a cozy fantasy story where like this guy just has the ability to manipulate his stats essentially on some level. Like he can program his experience a little bit better. But the isekai stuff, he's not overpowered at all, right? He's got a lot of stuff, but it's mostly how he just like min-maxes his build essentially to do what he wants to do that like helps him out. And he's not doing anything crazy thus far. It's just kind of like a cozy, like here's a story, here's some fantasy shit, and like that's what we're doing. And so I'm enjoying it, and I would recommend it to anyone who just likes cozy fantasy stuff that's not too heavy. And yeah, cool. Well, hey, I'll catch y'all later.